Hey YouTube, thanks for tuning in. Hang in just a second while I read into the podcast. Welcome to #HealMeToo at home, with insights, art, and activism to meet the needs of now. I'm Hope Singson, the artist, activist, survivor, and founder of the HealMeToo Festival and podcast. If you're listening on Apple or any podcast, you might want to hop on over to YouTube to watch the video of today's episode on our brand new #HealMeToo podcast and festival channel. In the HealMeToo at Home series, we are talking to advocates and healing practitioners about all the different traumas that survivors and our communities are experiencing in these times, with a special focus on stories you may not be hearing about and ideas, tools, and actions that may help. Subscribe to the HealMeToo podcast today on Apple and YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts, and follow us at HealMeToo Fest on social media to hear about every new episode and every live event we start offering on Zoom. A quick note about today: we won't focus on graphic details, but I do encourage you to take a break or skip ahead anytime you need. And you can find a list of support resources at HealMeTooPodcast.com. I want to acknowledge that HealMeToo at Home is recorded in our homes, so we'll keep our fingers crossed that everyone's pets and families and Wi-Fi are cooperative. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Maureen Curtis and Sherri Papamihalis of Safe Horizon, the largest nonprofit victim services agency in the United States, so we can get an update on the spike in domestic violence from early in the shutdown, as well as other family violence, and the many impacts of the pandemic, as well as the ongoing uprising in defense of Black lives. Maureen Curtis is a Vice President of Criminal Justice and Court Programs at Safe Horizon, responsible for developing and overseeing their criminal justice programs with a staff of more than 150 in 40 locations citywide and a budget of $10 million. She has worked for more than 30 years in the field of victimization, assisting survivors of domestic violence and advocating for victims' rights within the criminal justice and housing systems. Sherri Papamihalis is a clinical director at Safe Horizon's Counseling Center and has been a social worker since 1986. She has provided counseling and advocacy to sexual abuse and rape survivors for more than 20 years. She continues to provide trauma-focused treatment to survivors of crime and also provides clinical supervision in the counseling center since 2008. I'm very, very happy to welcome Sherri and Maureen. You can come off mute and say hello.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
It's really lovely to have you. I would love to hear from both of you a little more about, the work that you do and the work of Safe Horizon. I'm happy for either of you to start.
Do you want me to start, Sherri? Go ahead, you start.
Yeah. Hi, this is Sherri Papamihalis. I'm the clinical director at Safe Horizon's Counseling Center. I've been working there since 2008. We provide therapy and trauma-informed therapy for children, adolescents, and adults who have experienced crime and interpersonal violence. The youngest child we've seen was 8 months old with their caregiver, and our oldest client is 72, I believe. We provide individual therapy for adults, and we provide 2 different types of therapy for children 0 to 5. And then we also provide individual therapy for adult survivors.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maureen, do you want to give an overview of some of the work you're doing?
Sure. So thank you for inviting me. So I have been with the agency about 35 years now, and I oversee the criminal justice programs. These are our programs in the police precincts citywide, family justice centers, criminal courts, family courts, supervised visitation programs, and children's centers in the courts. And and as Sherri mentioned, the work that we do is client-centered and trauma-informed. Different than Sherri's program, which is a counseling center. Our staff, we're not therapists. I'm a licensed social worker, but the work that we do doesn't require being a social worker. Most of our work is providing immediate and ongoing safety assessments and safety planning through a client-centered lens and a trauma-informed lens. Our goal is to meet the client where they're at and help them to explore the options and services that best meets their immediate needs. So for example, a person coming into a police precinct, they may not even be sure whether or not they want to file a police report. And we talk to them about what it means to file that police report, because maybe there's a mandatory arrest that's going to go into place and they don't want the person that's causing harm to them to be arrested. So we're going to talk with them about that so they can make an educated, informed decision about what is the best next step to keep themselves safe and their children safe. And this is something that we do in all of the programs, in criminal justice programs. And I just want to mention, as you had mentioned earlier, our agency is the largest victim services agency in the country. And in addition to the programs that I mentioned in criminal justice and Sherri's program, the counseling center, we have programs in the community. So some survivors may not want to come into the criminal justice system, but they do want to explore what their options are. So they may go to one of our community programs. We run 3 hotlines that work with victims of domestic violence, crime victims, as well as rape, sexual assault victims. We have law projects that work with domestic violence, immigration, anti-trafficking. We run shelters. We have about close to 800 shelter beds throughout New York City for domestic violence survivors and their children. And I have to mention, and that includes men who are survivors of domestic violence. We were one of the, if not the first agency in New York City that accepted men into our shelters several years ago. Yeah. And then we have a program called Street Work, which works with runaway homeless youth. And no matter where you enter in our agency, all of our services are client-centered, trauma-informed, and we try to always meet that client where they are and help them to decide what's the best next steps for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. And you're reminding me why I was very excited that we were able to schedule this conversation for early in the HealMeToo at Home series, because I feel like you're both ideally positioned to help update us about what's been happening. The news is just intense and nonstop, right? So, and there's more and more and more of it. There's more crisis all the time. There's more stuff going on all the time. So I feel like really early in the pandemic, in the shutdown in New York, we started to hear, and across the country, we started to hear about the spike in domestic violence that, of course, people were experiencing when confined at home in situations that weren't necessarily safe. And then we stopped hearing about it because everything else started happening. And I'm curious, I guess if we could almost go back in time and start from where we maybe last heard threads of this story. And then if you wanted to update us a little. And I mean, I feel like there's so many threads to this story because there's so many forms of survivorship, and even people who aren't in a dangerous situation currently. I know a lot of people have been experiencing PTSD because just the experience of being at risk is very triggering. So I know I'm handing you like a big mess of a question here. I know you're both able to handle it. So Sherri, why don't we go back to you and maybe what you've been, as I said, sort of if we start back in March and catch us up a little.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we thought about at the counseling center is that what we really wanted to be able to do when we heard about the pandemic and the possibility that we were going to be working remote, is how is that going to work? And I think what's been very helpful is the Office of Mental Health was able to allow us to do what they call telehealth. All of our clients prior to the pandemic were coming actually into the space of the counseling center. They would call our intake line. There would be a brief assessment about why are they calling now, because we think about all of our clients have had trauma or be a victim of a crime, and they have been dealing with trauma reactions, PTSD, prior to them picking up the phone. But we think, there's something about this specific day that makes the client pick up the phone and call us. So whatever they have been doing to help them to manage isn't working. Or as Maureen had mentioned, there are lots of programs within Safe Horizon, and we have a lot of internal referrals from the shelters, from street work, from the court programs, from the domestic violence hotline, and all of the other programs, and they refer clients to us. And so what we thought about is, how are we going to be able to seamlessly continue to provide services to the current clients? And then what about the clients that want therapy, but are going to be at home, and they're going to be at home with their children, or especially with domestic violence, we have a large population of domestic violence survivors that come for themselves, and they also come with their children. And so they could be living with the person who causes harm, or they could be separated, and they would come to the counseling center and they would receive trauma-informed therapy, helping them to first identify what are the trauma reactions that you're having now that are impacting you, that made you pick up the phone and call us. What is happening with your children? What do we see happening in schools? What do we see happening at home? So we would be able to do an assessment using specific assessment tools, forms that ask specific questions. And so they would come in and we would do the therapy. And then we thought, now how is this going to work once people aren't able to come in? And as I said before, the Office of Mental Health allowed us and lots of other clinics, but to provide therapy at home. So that's either over the phone or with Zoom on video. And one of the things that we thought would happen, which has not happened, is that our clients would not want us to come into their homes, have issues with the person who causes harm, who's there, and how is that going to work safely. But luckily, we have been able to do that, and we depend on our caregivers and our adult clients to really figure out how are they going to be able to call us for therapy. What are they going to say to the person causing harm about who are they talking to? And so we're able to partner with them because they know them best. How are they going to do that? What are some safety words if you have to hang up or we need to go, or who am I supposed to be? And so we've been able to, seamlessly do that. And, the children are a part of the therapy. We're able to still engage the children. It's interesting for them. Like, on video, like you'll hear them in the background. They're screaming, they're running around, the mom's, cooking dinner and trying to take care of her children, and they're actually managing all of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's really been an incredible journey. And we've also, believe it or not, have actually had more, I guess not believe it or not, because given everything that's happening, we're getting more referrals within Safe Horizon, also referrals. So, people are calling by looking us up online and getting support. So I think that's been very helpful. Especially also given some of the other additional things that you mentioned, the uprising, the protests. And most of our clients are people of color, Black and brown, and other people of color. And We were just talking about this today, how a lot is coming up because we look at racial trauma in addition to being a survivor of domestic violence or sexual abuse or another crime. And so there's that, and the historical impact of racial trauma, and that we're also allowing space for the clients to also talk about that in the therapy, and the impact of the pandemic and the impact of being quarantined. So it's shifted in the sense that it's not just the actual interpersonal crime, but it's that and all of the other things that are happening for them.
Which on some level, I think, has always been the case. But right now, maybe I'll ask you to speak with your experience working with people. I can only assume that having such a sustained focus on such painful topics, is requiring, it's just requiring people on all sides of the problem of racism in our country to contend with it all the time. Not all the time, but I don't know. I guess I'm stating the obvious, but I assume that just means that. Well, can you speak about how people are traveling that in tandem with these issues, like survivorship and
Yeah, I think it's interesting depending on the age of clients. I have several clients who are, like in their 40s or 50s, and we were talking about how depending on your age, and just speaking of myself as a Black woman, like growing up in the 60s, you date myself, that there is, you've always experienced racism, but it's not something that you talk about. You just keep going, you keep moving, you keep doing, and you get really good at kind of just pushing it away. And I think that now that it's really in the forefront, and we're talking about that, and it's being acknowledged that it is trauma and that it is impacting. It's impacting people's, what we talk about all the time, the sensitized nervous system, people's sensations in their bodies, their hearts beating fast, feeling more angry, feeling more agitated, just and more sensitized to just everything that they're seeing on TV, in social media, that it's coming from all sides. And it's kind of what I said to someone the other day. It has really awakened like a sleeping bear, if you will. And so having a therapist, acknowledge that and bring that into the space is really helpful and relieving for clients. And to say, this is trauma. And you hear clients like, is it? I haven't thought about this since I was a little girl. I haven't thought about this since I was a little boy. I didn't realize that this is why I'm having even more difficulty sleeping, or I'm feeling more frightened when I go outside, or my young Black son has to wear a mask when he goes out. How is he going to be seen? He's going to be in more danger. So these are also things that are coming up for a lot of clients, that we're actually talking about that in the trauma-informed therapy, in addition to talking about the physical abuse or the sexual abuse, the domestic violence. So
thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for talking about that, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Maureen, would you like to talk about the court side of it, or other aspects of what you're doing? I guess with the same setup of sort of thinking back to March and then how we've traveled through this time to now.
Sure. It's interesting when you first said the increase in domestic violence, and back in March, we didn't see an increase. We actually saw a decrease coming into our hotline. And it wasn't surprising because here we are being told that in order to stay safe, you needed to stay at home. And for survivors, staying at home is not necessarily a safe place. So, and, they may not have the ability of calling the hotline to speak to somebody. And then over time, we gradually started to see an increase in our calls to the hotline. And what we realized was very early on that we needed to make sure that survivors and the community at large knew that services were still available, because we were hearing that people thought that you couldn't get into shelter, that because the courts were closed, you couldn't get an order of protection. So our first, what we realized that was really important was to make sure that we used whatever platform or outreach that we could to reach as many people as possible, and working together with our partners, both in the community as well as in the government, to get the message out there that yes, because at the time, the courts had shut down. Our agency is a very large agency, and probably about 80% of our agency went remote. And people thought that because we were working remote, that meant that we weren't providing services. And that wasn't true. We had to learn very quickly how to adapt our services so that we could continue providing them. And we had to make sure that we were communicating to everybody that these services were still available. So we made sure that people knew that the hotlines were still available 24/7. That if a person was in need of shelter, that shelters were not at capacity, that shelters were still accepting survivors and their children. That if you felt the need to call the police, that the police were still responding, even though you might be hearing on the news that, like at one time, about a third of the police department was either sick or exposed to COVID. So that was a real depletion of police officers. Right. So we needed to make sure that we did that. And then what was a challenge for us was then to see and to make that adapting to remote services. And Sherri mentioned this, that we, because we're a large agency and we have so many programs that work closely together, but yet are unique in their own way, we really depended on the referrals coming from one another. So we made sure that the hotline knew that, yes, the courts were closed or the Family Justice Center was closed and the precinct advocates were no longer in the precincts, but this was how you could contact us if you need us, and not just that the community or survivor could contact us, but if they contacted the hotline and a person said, well, I'm really interested in getting an order of protection, the hotline advocate is going to do their initial assessment and provide their services, and then say, and here is, and send us an email so that they're letting us know, follow up with this person so that we could help them get that order of protection remotely. I think what was also really helpful in making our remote work so successful was not just our strong relationships that we have within Safe Horizon with our colleagues, but our relationships that we have within systems. So when the courts shut down, I attend different meetings in the community, and you'd hear about how the chaos in upstate or even just north of the city, and how it was chaotic, that people couldn't get orders of protection and that they weren't navigating the shutdown of the courts and adapting to remote work seamlessly. Whereas here in New York City, because of our relationships that we have, we made the remote work very successful very quickly. And that really spoke to our knowledge and expertise, because this is what we do when we are in the court. We help survivors petition for an order of protection, and because of the relationships that we have in those courts. So we very quickly developed a system so that when a person called the court, because anybody right now can call the court number and petition for an order of protection remotely on their own. It's hard to do, and you may not be as successful because, it's not easy to do it on your own, but technically you can do it on your own. But because of the relationship we have, the court, as they get these calls, send them directly to us. And we work, we'll either do it ourselves or we work closely with our partner attorney programs, such as our domestic violence law project or other civil legal agencies in the city. So all of this has really made a big difference in how we provide those services and how we're able to connect to the clients who need our assistance. I think the other thing that we also did, because of our size and just the number of survivors that we just naturally help before COVID, we went into our database, and I think Sherri, spoke about this, that a person may not have been during COVID in physical danger, but now this is triggering trauma for them, and they may need to speak with somebody. So we were following up with our clients just to see how they were doing, and if they were interested in additional services, connecting them, linking them to, one of our Safe Horizon programs, such as the counseling center if needed, or other programs either in the community or within Safe Horizon. So I think that I can't say enough about how successful New York City, I really think, has been in terms of, making making services provision so successful. And I really believe that that's because of the strong partnerships and relationships that we have nurtured and fostered over the years. That's really made it easier for us to be successful. And one of the things that I didn't mention earlier that a lot of people don't know about our agency is that we work with all victims of crime. So in addition to, multiple traumas, as Sherri mentioned, a person could be suffering, impacted by racial trauma, by victimization, by, but it also could be community crime, or it could be other, we did a lot of work with survivors who were survivors of domestic violence, but were impacted by Sandy years ago. So all of that, has an impact on our clients, and we're able to, one, because we are addressing or meeting the client where they're at, we're helping them to, to address that and meet those needs by, either providing the immediate assistance ourselves or connecting them with other programs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Actually, let's take a moment and share with listeners and viewers how they can find you guys. So you mentioned a hotline, and let's just give that number out. Do you have it at the tip of your tongue, or should I look it up? Because I'd love to.
It's the domestic violence hotline is 1-800-621-HOPE 4673.
That's great.
And then the other two hotlines, we have three hotlines: the crime victim hotline and rape, sexual assault, and incest hotline. They're all three of those hotlines go into the same service, and all advocates are experienced in responding to whatever needs any survivor might have.
So that number you just gave is actually good for all those categories of experience and need people might have. Good. And is there a sort of a portal through your website for people to reach out and request help, or is it more the hotline? Should we also give the website?
I think the website would be great, because the other thing that I forgot to mention is we have a Safe Chat. This was a new service that Safe Horizon created, just launched probably just in about September or October, and was created. We have an initiative in our agency called Young Men of Color, where a few years back, we were challenged by, I'll always remember sitting in this meeting by this young woman who came to one of our meetings and said, you're the largest victim services agency in the country, and you say you provide services to all victims of crime, and yet, and young men of color are the largest number of crime victims in New York City, but you provide very few services. So if you look at the population of our clients, young men of color are very small. And this young woman challenged us and said, you know, you really need to look at that and make decisions about, one, either you expand your services to make sure that you are providing services for young men of color who are impacted by violence in the city, or really use your voice to ensure that these services are provided. And we were able to secure money to, you know, for the Young Men of Color initiative that that has really made a difference in the type of services that we provide, both individually. We've hired staff who work specifically with young men of color, as well as a coordinator who does training on what trauma in young men of color looks like. Because the other thing that we know is that trauma in a man looks different than a woman, and it looks, you know, and it's different in young men of color. So all of that, you know, has really shifted, helped us to shift how we are as an agency. And out of that came the Safe Chat, where in recognizing that, you know, young men, and partly because of age as well, they don't communicate via a hotline. You know, they're more, you know, texting and chatting. So we launched this in September, and it actually was helpful during COVID, because we realized that some people could not call, did not feel safe or were not able to call the hotline, but they could text. So they expanded the the Safe Chat to include services for victims of domestic violence. So anybody, you know, whether you're a young man of color or you're a victim of domestic violence, you can call the text on the Safe Chat, and you know, it could be just to talk about what's happening in your life, or it could be to gain information or access to services.
And that's available right from your website, safehorizon.org.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. The only thing is, it's different than the hotline, where it's not 24/7.
Okay. Yeah, it's not staffed at all times, but that's really a great service. You know, I wanted to come back because I thank you for correcting my misimpression. I think that because there were a number of news stories saying, I guess they were saying, advocates believe that there's an increase in domestic violence during shutdown. But you're saying actually the reach outs were not going up. It's just that I'm sort of wondering, why did I see those news stories that gave me this impression there was a spike? Was it just that we were reasoning it out, or was it actually seen in some way a little later?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, we were seeing it in the state. You were hearing it across the country. You were definitely hearing about it in other countries. I mean, you know, some countries like China were saying they saw a significant spike, not just in domestic violence incidents, but domestic violence homicides. Oh. Initially, we didn't see, we actually saw a drop. As I said, was probably more connected to, it didn't mean that it wasn't happening. It was just more hidden than it usually is. But now we're definitely seeing an increase. And I think sadly, because, you know, there is such a, sorry.
No worries.
We've seen an increase also because, you know, so much more of a need because of also now the economy, you know, people losing their jobs, it's escalating of violence in the home, whether it be the survivor losing their job. And, you know, and it's also caused us to, you know, reassess and the type of, how we're meeting the needs of clients, so that, you know, it's meeting more concrete needs. I mean, we've always done that, but, you know, for example, we traditionally give out gift cards to help people with just basic needs, but we hand them to our clients, and we were able to get them set up so that we could do that electronically. So now we can just give it to our clients electronically, and we don't have to give it to them face to face.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. One of the reasons that I was interested in broadening the types of trauma that we're focusing on throughout this Heal Me Too at Home series, because obviously it's sort of the foundation of this platform is around sexual violence, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, but it's really obvious. It's always been obvious, and now it's more than ever how much everything intersects. And, you know, you can't really heal your trauma from sexual violence when you can't eat, and you can't, you know, I don't even need to continue giving the examples of how all of this is so connected.
Go
ahead, Sherri.
Yeah, I was thinking about something that you both were saying about, you know, either the spike in domestic violence or not. And I think this I'm thinking about in relation to children and childhood sexual abuse, childhood physical abuse. I think one of the things that has shifted from pre-COVID to COVID is when children stopped going to school. There stopped being teachers who had their eyes on them. When people don't have access to the internet, or they don't have the laptop, they can't do Zoom, teachers can't see them. So there are children who have been more isolated, where a teacher, a guidance counselor, or ACS, someone isn't seeing them to see that maybe something's happening, which you do see in schools when children are there, when they're on the playground or they're interacting in the world. So can be where children are experiencing violence or abuse at home, and because they're isolated, there's nobody really to intervene. But I think one of the things that speaks to, you know, something that Maureen was saying and about partnerships, that getting the word out, which we were able to do. We had to change our outgoing message at the counseling center, because people thought, oh, well, since the pandemic, we're quarantined, the counseling center isn't open and people can't get therapy. And there were lots of like community partners outside of Safe Horizon that didn't know that either. So we, after like a week or so, we changed our outgoing message to say that we're still open, we're still providing therapy. And so I think one of the other things that has happened, because we're all remote, we have the opportunity to have more meetings and actually get to more meetings and see each other. And so I feel like there's been more, at least from the counseling center, more opportunities to meet with other programs and to talk more about what we do. And so I think it has really increased everyone's ability to send an email, pick up a phone, and, you know, refer someone. Or even like the other night, someone from the hotline emailed me saying so-and-so was a client that had called the hotline and they're trying to get therapy. Can you follow up? So of course I could connect them to our intake assessment specialist, and then they were able to call the client. And there also is the safe chat that Maureen mentioned. And so clients who can't call, who, because the person causing harm is in the next room, can also text and initiate services at the counseling center that way with our intake team. So that's something new and different that we couldn't do before. So I think that has also helped to increase people's ability to reach out for services. Or we also kind of changed the way it used to be 45 minutes or an hour if it's a family. And so now it may be 20 minutes this time and we'll call you back later. Or someone who lives in Staten Island that needs someone who is Spanish speaking, you know, doesn't have to like go to our clinic. They can, you know, pick up a phone and they can connect to the therapist who's working remotely anywhere. So I think it has also given people who don't have, like Maureen was saying, may not have resources because unemployment, don't have a Metro card, can't get to the counseling center. They don't need to get to the counseling center. They can do this remotely. So that's also helped people who don't have a Metro card or don't have childcare and can't travel with all their children. They don't need to travel with their children. They can get services. So that has really, I think, been one of the silver linings, that telehealth has really helped increase the ability for people to receive services, people going in the bathroom and closing the door and having like a session while their kids or whoever is in the living room. So I think that's been very helpful for people to get counseling services where they may not have been able to before.
Yeah, it sounds like you all have made a lot of wonderful adjustments to just meet this moment, where we are. I wanted to come back to the kids because I think that, there was a lot of coverage in the press previously about the likely increase in domestic violence. And I was thinking to myself, well, what about also the kids who are much more always stuck at home, but now with less, as you said, less opportunities to connect with people outside the home. So obviously there's a lot we can't do for people in that situation. But I just wondered, are there any things that you want to let people know that they can do? Like early in the pandemic, we were hearing, reach out to people and just see if they're doing okay, and reach out to people you think may be in unsafe relationships. This is the problem with childhood sexual abuse or physical abuse, that you don't know. So I'm sort of grasping for what can we offer that might be of help. Also possibly things for whether it's parents or whether it's other people around the child who do still get to see the child on Zoom or elsewhere. What sorts of things can we look for? Is there anything that maybe can help with this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people don't realize a lot of times when it comes to children and therapy, that they're going to bring their child to the therapist and say, here, see my child, work with them. But the way that we work at the counseling center is that we really hold that the caregiver is the most important person to that child. And even if we are not directly engaging the child, what research says is that engaging a caregiver and supporting them, getting them to begin to understand, what does trauma look like in a 3-year-old? Are they not sleeping because, they're 3 and they're struggling with that? Or is it developmental, or is there trauma? Does this affect my child? And I think a lot of times just being able to have a caregiver reach out, and we can ask those questions. We can ask, well, what kinds of things are you noticing? Do you notice that this is more now that they're at home all the time? Is this part of being quarantined, or is this trauma? Sometimes it's another relative. It doesn't always have to be a parent. It can be a caregiver. It can be a grandmother, an aunt. We've had adult siblings who are the caregiver and the therapy with their younger siblings because the parent isn't there. The parent is not available. I think a lot of times just having somebody to call, so they would call, the intake and speak to the intake worker who would do like a brief assessment, and then they would connect them to a therapist, and we could do an assessment about what's happening. And plane overhead.
No worries.
And because we are connected to many different programs within Safe Horizon, that we do the therapy. So we're going to help around trauma reactions and coping skills and helping to support the caregiver. But what if they need something else? I mean, we've had to call the State Central Registry in Albany to report a disclosure. Some were working with an adult and they were telling us something that happened to their child where they were at a visit with the person who causes harm, and they come back and they say that this abuse has happened and that has happened. That we work with the parent and let them know that we're mandated reporters, and that we would need to make a report to the State Central Registry, which then gets a certain number of services involved. And at Safe Horizon, there are child advocacy centers where there's the police, there is ACS, there's the social workers, the people that do the investigating, that work with the families. And so through a case being called in to the state and it gets dispatched, and when we call the State Central Registry, we tell them that in at Verizon, we have child advocacy centers in all the boroughs. And yes, I know you're going to call Child Protective Services, but try to connect them to the Child Advocacy Center in Brooklyn, for example, or Queens. And so then they're connected within Safe Horizon so they can get whatever additional services they might need throughout the agency, and then also be able to get some short-term counseling through the Child Advocacy Center. And then if they need something more longer term, then they get connected to the counseling center. And so I think that's one of the wonderful things about our agency, the fact that there are so many different resources at our disposal. So we can, like as Maureen mentioned, we have community programs that do more concrete services and case management and advocacy and helping them to deal with the legal system, which that's not our area of expertise. So we're providing one service, and then we can connect them to one of the other programs that can provide some of the other services.
Yes, wonderful.
And I would just add to what you said earlier. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is never underestimate the power that that individual can have, because we know that particularly with children in the home, there isn't that same eye on what's happening there. We did see a significant drop in state reports to the states under register, as well as cases coming into our CACs initially. And that's why it's really important for, family, friends, community members to really, and not in a blaming, judging kind of way, but really just keep the eye, be aware of what, whether it's a child who might be in need of, or whether it's an adult who might be in need, and we talked with the police. The police we're still responding to incidents of domestic violence, and it's even more important that they take a look at the children there. And once again, not, in any kind of policing way, but just to, really ensure that the children are okay in the home. We also operate a supervised visitation program that I just want to mention in terms of remote work, which we supervise visits with non-custodial parents and their child or children in a safe setting. And the cases that we see are referred from the court, and most of them are referred because of violence in the home. And we were able to adapt these visits to remote visits for some of our families. And that has really been successful in terms of, ensuring that the service continues, because even when there's violence in the home, the child still wants to see their parent. Usually it's the dad, and oftentimes mom, the survivor, wants dad to see the child because they know that that's important for the child to be able to see. They just want it to happen in a safe way and a safe location. And I think to what Sherri is saying, what we're really hoping is that some of these new ways of doing things, particularly remote, are going to live past COVID, because it really is successful for so many of our clients for a variety of reasons. We're actually evaluating our Zoom visits to see what our clients think of that, because the families we're working with now started with in-person, and now we're getting Zoom. We're using Zoom as a platform visits, and we're going to be asking them what they thought of it and if they find it to be helpful for themselves and their children.
Right. Yeah, that would be amazing if some of the tools that we get through this time actually help increase what we're able to do, what you're able to do. Well, we have sort of gotten to the end of the time that we planned to have this conversation. And I wanted to, first of all, just thank you both for the work you're doing, and also for coming on this platform to share about it with listeners and viewers.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. That's it for today. Tune in next week and every week for more ideas that may help with the needs of right now, whether you're a survivor, an ally, or a member of our communities experiencing stress and trauma in these times. In the meantime, you can catch up on the episodes and extras from our first and second seasons. Subscribe to our HealMeToo podcast and festival YouTube channel, as well as on Apple Podcasts. If you leave a quick rating and review on iTunes, you can help more survivors and allies to find us. You can join our mailing list at HealMeTooPodcast.com to hear about our future festival pop-up events on Zoom, and follow us on social media. We are at HealMeTooFest. Please say hi in the comments, and thank you for listening.